The arena of Korvath had never tasted blood like hers. Mireska wiped the crimson smear from her lower lip with the back of her wrist, her chest heaving beneath the dented breastplate that had saved her ribs 3 times in the last hour. Above her, the tiered stone benches of the sundering Colosseum rose in 9 concentric rings, every seat filled, and every voice screaming her name. 40,000 wolves on their feet, 40,000 throats roaring a sound she had never expected to hear in her short, stolen life. Mireska! 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 The chant hammered against the iron sky like a smith's hammer on an anvil. She turned slowly in the center of the sand, the curved blades of her twin sabers trailing red lines through the dust at her feet, and let the sound wash over her. 3 weeks ago she had been nobody. A foundling raised in the cold mountain hospice of Brenvar, taught to read by candlelight and to bandage wounds by the stern hands of the Sisters of the White Pine. 3 weeks ago her name had meant nothing. Now it shook the bones of an empire. She should have been afraid. She had been afraid, 100 times over, in every preliminary bout and every quarterfinal cut. But the fear had burned away somewhere in the 7th round, and what remained beneath it was something colder, something older, something she did not yet have a name for. It hummed in her chest like a struck bell. The herald's voice rolled across the arena, magnified by the windstones embedded in the high walls. Citizens of the Twin Crowns, lords of the 8 packs, sons and daughters of the free peoples. The old wolf paused, savoring the moment. Behold your champion, the first woman in 1700 years to claim the solstice trial, the lone blade of Brenvar Mireska of no house. The roar that followed was a physical thing. It pressed against her sternum, it rattled the loose stones at the arena's edge, it made the great iron chandeliers tremble on their chains. Mireska planted her sabers in the sand, point down, and dropped to one knee in the formal pose of victory. She lowered her head to hide the tears she could not stop, and the crowd, mistaking grief for piety, roared louder. She was not weeping for honor. She was weeping because in 3 nights, when the moons aligned, the prize would be paid out. The solstice trial of Korvath promised a champion the same thing it had promised for 2,000 years, any single boon within the power of the Twin Crowns to grant. Land, title, gold beyond counting. The freedom of the high passes, a pardon for any crime save kinslaying, or for the rarest of victors, the ones the old songs whispered about a name, a true name, a house, a place in the world that no one could ever take from you again. That was what Mireska had come for, not the gold, not the land, the name, because the foundling of Brenvar had a secret she had carried since she was old enough to hide it, and she had decided, the night her hospice burned with 7 sisters trapped inside, that she would never again be a person small enough to be erased. She rose from her knee, the crowd's noise crested and broke and crested again, and through the thunder of it she walked the long ceremonial path toward the royal gallery, her sabers sheathed now across her back in their double scabbard, her wolfskin half-cloak trailing in the sand behind her. She did not look up at the gallery as she walked. She had been warned not to. The Herald Master had drilled her 3 days running on the protocols of the presentation. Eyes lowered until summoned. Voice low until addressed. Bow at the 3rd line of the white tiles. Bow again at the 7th. Kneel at the foot of the dais, and remain kneeling until the Twin Crowns granted leave to rise. Mireska did all of it. She had been a creature of obedience all her life. She knew the shape of bowing, the way some children knew the shape of lullabies. When she reached the foot of the dais and lowered herself onto both knees, the noise in the Colosseum did something she had not expected. It stopped. Not gradually, not in waves. All at once, as if a single hand had clamped down over the throats of 40,000 wolves and squeezed. The silence rang in her ears more loudly than the cheering had. Mireska kept her head bowed. The white tiles were cold beneath her knees. She could see her own reflection in the polished marble, a young woman with wheat-pale hair half loose from its braid, with a smear of someone else's blood drying along her jaw, with eyes the color of wet slate. She did not look like a champion. She looked like a girl who had survived a thing she should not have survived. A voice she did not know broke the silence. Rise, Mareska of no house. She rose. The royal gallery of the Sundering Colosseum was carved from a single block of obsidian glass 2 stories tall, and at its center, on a dais of white marble veined with gold, stood the twin thrones of Corvath. They had been empty for 9 years. Ever since the death of the old High King without an heir, the twin crowns had been held in trust by the Regency Council, and the 2 great kingdoms beneath the twin crowns, the northern crown of Voskaldr and the southern crown of Halmenreach, had ruled themselves separately, under their own young alphas, in an uneasy peace that everyone in the realm knew could not last. Tonight, for the first time in 9 years, both thrones were filled. On the left throne sat the Alpha King of the North, King Drevin of the House of Alder. He was tall, even-seated, broader than any man she had ever seen, with hair the deep brown-black of winter pine, and a beard cut short along the jaw. His eyes, when they found her, were the gold of old amber held to a candle. He wore the gray and silver of his crown without ornament, no chains, no rings, only the iron circlet of Voskaldr resting on his brow. He had a stillness to him that made her think of the great wolves of the high passes, the ones who watched you for a long time before they decided what you were. On the right throne sat the Alpha King of the South, King Calden of the House of Halmenreach. He was leaner than the Northern King, sharper of feature, with hair so pale it looked like beaten silver in the lamplight, and eyes that should not have been the color they were, a green, the shade of river ice in the first thaw. He wore black and crimson, and unlike his counterpart, he had ornament enough for both of them. Rings on every finger, a chain of office at his throat, the antlered crown of Halmenreach set at a slight rakish angle on his head. He smiled when he saw her. It was not a kind smile. Between them, on a smaller throne behind and above, sat the regent, old Vishan of the Ash Council, the wolf who had held the twin crowns in trust since the High King's death, with his face the color of weathered parchment, and his hands folded over a staff of black ironwood. Mireska of no house, the regent said, his voice surprisingly clear for his age. You have done what no woman has done in 1700 years, and what no commoner has done in 900. You have taken the solstice trial. The realm is in your debt. Speak, then, of the boon you would claim, that your service may be paid in full. Mireska had practiced these words for 3 weeks. She had whispered them into the dark of her training cell every night before sleep. She had murmured them between rounds, behind the canvas of the staging tents, with her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists to make them still. She drew a breath. The breath caught somewhere just beneath her sternum, where the hum of the bell thing had been earlier, but she pushed past it. I claim a name, she said. Her voice carried farther than she expected. The silence of the Colosseum amplified it. I claim a house. I ask the twin crowns to grant me the right to found my own line, with all the privileges and protections of the recognized houses of the realm. That is the boon I claim. The regent's parchment face tilted very slightly. He had expected gold. They always asked for gold. He opened his mouth to grant it. He never spoke the words. King Drevin of the North rose from his throne. The motion was slow, considered, almost lazy, and yet every wolf in the gallery, every wolf on the tiered benches, every guard along the walls turned to look at him as if a bell had rung. He stepped forward to the edge of the dais, and his amber eyes did not leave Mareska's face. With respect to the council, he said, and his voice was a low rumble that carried without effort, the boon she claims is granted, but the boon she claims is not the boon she is owed. The regent's mouth tightened. Your Majesty, she is the champion of the solstice trial, King Drevin said. By the oldest law, older than the council, older than the twin crowns themselves, the champion of the trial belongs to the realm in a deeper sense than gold or land or even a name can answer. I claim the elder right. His gaze finally moved from Mareska's face to the regent's. I claim her as Queen of Voskaldr. I claim her as my mate. The Colosseum did not roar this time. It made a sound Mireska had never heard a crowd make, a vast, indrawn breath, as if 40,000 throats had inhaled at once and forgotten how to exhale. Mireska's knees nearly gave out. She had read about the elder rite. Every child of the hospice had read about it, because the Sisters of the White Pine were scholars of the old laws, and the elder rite was one of those bloody footnotes the old laws were full of. It dated to the Sundering itself. 1,000 years past a clause embedded in the founding compact that gave any sitting Alpha King the right to claim a trial champion as a consort, on the grounds that any wolf strong enough to win the trial was worthy to bear the next generation of the royal line. It had not been invoked in 800 years. It had been thought a dead clause, a curiosity of old law. The Northern King had just resurrected it. Mireska's mouth opened. She had no idea what was going to come out. She would never find out, because in the same instant, the precise same instant, King Caldan of the South rose from the right throne, and his river ice eyes fixed on his counterpart with a smile that was, somehow, even less kind than the one he had given her. With even greater respect to the council, King Caldan said, and his voice was lighter than the Northern King's, almost amused. And with no respect at all to my dear cousin of Voskalder, his teeth showed at the word times cousin. I also claim the elder right. I also claim the champion as queen. I also claim her as my mate. The indrawn breath of the Colosseum finally broke. 40,000 wolves released it as a single, ragged cry, and the cry built into a roar, and the roar built into chaos. Mireska stood frozen on the white tiles. She was looking up at two kings, 2 crowns, 2 pairs of eyes that had locked across the dais with an old and patient hatred, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once and very late, that she had not won the solstice trial at all. She had been won by it. The hum in her chest, the bell thing she had no name for, rang once, hard, and went silent. And somewhere in the press of the high gallery, behind the screen of carved obsidian where the council's witnesses sat unseen, a single pair of eyes she could not see was already watching her with a stillness that was neither northern nor southern, neither amber nor green, but something else entirely, and a hand she could not see was already writing the first lines of a letter that, when it reached its destination 3 nights from now, would shatter the realm she had just won. Mireska did not know any of that. She only knew that the Herald Master had not drilled her on this part. The cell they gave her in the Champion's Tower was the most beautiful room she had ever stood inside, and it was still a cell. Mireska turned slowly in the center of it, taking it in piece by piece, the way she took in a battlefield before a duel. White marble floor inlaid with the 8-pointed star of Corvath. Walls hung with tapestries showing the Sundering, the founding war that had split the old wolf empire into the twin crowns 9 centuries ago. A high vaulted ceiling painted with the constellations of the southern sky. A bed wider than the entire sleeping bench she had shared with 3 other novices at Brenvar, draped in furs she did not recognize. A copper bath already drawn and steaming. A platter of food on a low table, bread still warm. 2 kinds of cheese. A roasted fowl she had no names for. A flask of dark wine. And on every door, every window, every possible avenue of departure, a guard. 2 of them at the main door. 1 at each of the narrow window slits, which were too narrow for a wolf in human form to pass through, and far too high for any sane person to attempt. 1 in the antechamber, 1 on the stair below. The Ash Council had placed her under what they were politely calling the Champion's Honor, which was the same thing as house arrest with better linens. She had been here 3 nights. In 3 nights, the law required her to make a choice between the twin crowns. The 2 kings had each invoked the elder right. Neither would withdraw the claim. And so the council, in its wisdom, had ruled that the champion herself must speak the binding words before the assembled nobility, on the night of the 2nd full moon, the night after tomorrow. Whichever king she named would become her sworn mate, with all the rights and bonds that entailed. The other would withdraw to his own kingdom, and the realm would, the council prayed, not collapse into civil war over a foundling girl from a mountain hospice. Mareska had considered, very seriously, climbing out of one of the impossible windows. She had considered, less seriously, drinking the wine and seeing what the morning brought. She had considered, most seriously of all, telling anybody what she actually was, what had been growing in her since the night the hospice burned. The thing she could feel uncoiling slowly behind her sternum, the bell thing, the hum, the warmth, that was not a wolf's warmth, and was not a human's warmth, and was, she suspected, the reason no man in the trial had been able to land a clean killing blow on her. She had considered all of it, and done none of it. She was a creature of obedience. She was waiting to see what shape the cell took, before she tried to break it. A soft knock at the antechamber door. She turned. The guards there would not have knocked. They opened doors. They did not ask permission, which meant whoever stood in the antechamber had passed the guards already, and was extending her a courtesy. "Come," she said. The man who entered was the Northern King. He had not brought retinue. He had not brought ceremonial dress. He wore a plain dark tunic and dark trousers and soft boots, and he had left the iron circlet behind. Without it, in the ordinary clothes, he looked younger than he had on the dais. Perhaps 32 or 33, perhaps a little more. His amber eyes found her and stayed. "Champion," he said. He inclined his head. The gesture was small, but it was the gesture an equal made to an equal, not the gesture a king made to a subject. "Forgive the hour." "Your Majesty." She bowed correctly, the third line bow. The herald master would have approved. "Dreven," he said. "I am Dreven when I am not on a dais, and we are not on a dais." She did not know what to do with that. She said nothing. He seemed to understand. He took 2 slow steps into the room and stopped, well short of her, with his hands held loose and visible at his sides. It was the posture, she realized, of a man who was trying very hard not to frighten her. It was the posture, also, of a man who knew he was capable of frightening her without meaning to, and was conscious of the fact. "I have come to speak plainly," he said. "I have a council of 70 lords who will tell you the elder right is honor and tradition and the will of the gods. I have priests who will tell you it is sacred. I have my own court, who will tell you it is a great gift and you should be on your knees with gratitude." His mouth made a small, dry shape that was not a smile. "I have come to tell you that none of those people are speaking the truth, and that you deserve the truth before you choose." Myreska stood very still. "Speak it then," she said. He nodded. "I invoked the elder right because if I had not, my cousin would have. I knew he would. I have known he would since the 3rd round of the trial, when it became clear you would win, and I knew it for a certainty when I walked into the gallery this evening and saw the look on his face." Dreven paused. "Calden of Helmenreach is not a kind man. He is not a man you would wish to be bound to. I will not speak ill of him at length, because slander does not become a king, but I will say this. I would not consign a stray dog to his keeping, and I have known him since he was 12 years old. And so you claimed me first," Mareska said, "to save me from him." "I claimed you first," Dreven said, "because if one of us was going to do it, I preferred it be the one who would not break you." She let the words sit between them for a moment. They were not quite a confession of feeling, and they were not quite the words of a man bargaining for a wife. They were something else, something more careful, and she did not know yet what to do with the carefulness. "You do not love me," she said. "I do not know you," he answered. "Love is a thing built between 2 people across years. But I will tell you what I do feel, because you asked me for plain speech." He held her gaze. "When you walked the long path to the dais this evening, with your sabers across your back and the blood drying on your jaw, my wolf, the part of me that is older than my crown and older than my name, went very still. It has been still ever since. I have not felt my wolf go still in front of any woman before, and I am 36 years old, and I have stood in front of more women than I care to recount." Mareska's mouth went dry. "What does that mean?" she said. "I do not know," he said. "It is too soon to know. Among my people, when a wolf goes still, it sometimes means the recognition of a fated mate. Sometimes it means only that the wolf has met a thing it did not expect to meet and is taking the measure of it. Either way, I will not lie to you and tell you I claimed you for politics alone. I claimed you for politics, and for the saving of you from Calden, and because something in me did not wish to see another man's name spoken over you tonight. All three things are true at once. Mareska's hand had risen, without her noticing, to press flat against her sternum. The bell thing was humming. It had not hummed since the moment in the Colosseum when the two kings rose. It was humming now, quietly, like a string plucked in a far room. She did not know if it was responding to him. She did not yet know what it would mean if it was. "There will be 3 nights," Drevin said. "Before the binding. I will not press you. I will not visit you again unless you send for me. I have come tonight only because I wanted you to hear, from my own mouth, that I will not be Calden, and that whatever choice you make on the night of the second full moon, you will make it knowing what you are choosing between." He paused. "And one thing more." "Yes," Mireska said. "If you choose me," Drevin said, "and the bond does not take if your wolf does not answer mine, if the recognition is not there. If it turns out that what I felt in the Colosseum was only the still of a man surprised, I will release you from the binding within the year. By my crown and my blood. You will leave my kingdom with the name and the house you asked for, and with whatever else you wish to take, and you will not be hunted. That is my oath, and I have made it before none but you." She stared at him. She had spent 23 years of her life learning how men used women like coin. She had spent the last 3 weeks watching the Council of Corvath weigh her, name her, and then almost forget her in the rush to claim her. She had been ready, on the dais this evening, to bow her head to whichever king's claim went first, and consider herself lucky to have a name at the end of it. She had not been ready for an alpha king to walk into her cell at midnight, alone, and offer her an exit. "Why?" she said. It came out smaller than she meant it. Drevin considered her for a long moment. The amber of his eyes had banked down to something closer to candlelight than to fire. "Because my mother was claimed by the elder right," he said. "By my father, 40 years ago. She did not survive the 3rd winter. She was not. They were not what either of them needed. I was raised by a man who had broken a woman by accident and could not undo it. I have spent my entire life promising myself that if I ever invoked that law, I would do it differently." He bowed to her the equal to equal bow again, and he turned, and he left, and the door closed softly behind him. Mireska did not move for a long time after. The bell thing in her chest hummed once more, very quietly, and then it went still, and she could not tell whether that was an answer or only the absence of one. She slept badly. She dreamed of a corridor with no end, and of a voice that called her by a name she did not know, and of a small room in Brenvar, where 7 women in white robes stood in a circle around her cradle, and one of them, the eldest, with eyes the color of wet slate like her own, said something Mirska could not hear over the crackle of fire that was not yet there. She woke before dawn with her hands curled into fists, and the bell thing humming like a struck wire. The second visitor came at noon. The Southern King did not knock. The door of the antechamber simply opened, and Calden of Halmanreach walked through it as if it had been his own, with 2 of his own guards behind him in the black and crimson of Halmanreach. The council guards in the corridor, Mariska noted, did not move to stop him. They did not even seem to see him. That was the first thing that frightened her. "Champion." Calden smiled. He had several smiles. She was beginning to understand. None of them were the same smile. This one had teeth. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking." "They are very fine, Your Majesty," Mareska said. She bowed. The 3rd-line bow. The Herald Master would still have approved. "Calden," he said. He did not say it the way Drevin had said times Drevin. He said it the way a man named a hound. "We are to be intimate, you and I, or at least the realm seems to think so. Let us not be strangers." He moved further into the room without invitation. He did not stop at a respectful distance. He came within arm's length of her, and stayed there, and Mareska's spine became a thing of iron. "My counterpart visited you last night," Calden said. "Do not bother to deny it. The Northern King does nothing that is not reported to me within the hour, and his late-night charity to my future wife was reported to me before he had reached his own quarters." The smile stayed in place. The eyes, which were the wrong shade of green, did not blink as often as they should have. "Tell me, champion, what did he offer you?" "Conversation," Mireska said carefully. "Conversation." Calden's mouth twitched. "How chaste. And what did the conversation concern?" "The choice I am to make." "And did my dear cousin perhaps suggest," Calden said, "that the choice was already made? That his claim was the older, the deeper, the more honorable? That I, the Southern King, am a creature of low instinct and lower morals, and that you should fly into his protective arms before the second moon rises?" "He did not say those words, Your Majesty." "Of course he did not say those words. Dravan never says any words. He merely arranges for you to hear them in your own head." Calden moved a half-step closer. The bell thing in Mireska's chest had gone cold, not warm. It was the wrong note entirely. "Let me speak words, then, since I am the cruder of the two. I will not pretend to gentleness. I will not visit you in the small hours and offer you exits. I will tell you instead what you actually are and what you have actually won." He paused. He was waiting for her to ask. She did not ask. His smile widened anyway. "You are not the prize of the solstice trial, little champion. You are the time's bait." Mareska's heart did not so much skip as briefly forget what it was supposed to be doing. "The solstice trial of this year," Calden said, "has not been a true binding for 900 years for nothing, and it was not resurrected this year for nothing. The Ash Council brought it back because the twin crowns cannot remain divided forever, and the only mechanism in the old law by which the two kingdoms can be rejoined under a single line is the elder right. A champion claimed. A mate sworn. A child born of that union, who will inherit both times crowns by blood. That is what you have won, Mareska of no house. Not a name, not a house. A womb. The realm needed a womb that no faction owned, that no bloodline could contest, and that had proved itself strong enough to bear an heir that would not be murdered in the cradle by jealous cousins. The council looked for 9 years. The council found you. Mireska could not feel her hands. "They knew," Calden said. "Dreven knew. I knew. The regent has known since you cleared the 3rd round. The trial was a stage play, champion. We allowed it to run because the laws of the realm required a performance, but the casting was done long before you ever lifted a sword." "That is not true," Mareska whispered. "Of course it is true. Why else do you think no fighter in the trial managed to land a killing blow on you, despite being twice your size and 3 times your training? There were instructions, my dear. There are always instructions." The bell thing in her chest rang very hard once, like a hammer struck on a bell at the bottom of a well. She did not show it on her face. She had learned, at Brenvar, how not to show things on her face. "Why are you telling me this, Your Majesty?" she said. "Because Dreven offered you an exit, and I will not. Because my dear cousin will play the gentle protector and bind you slowly, and you will mistake his patience for kindness. Because I would rather you choose me knowing exactly what you are and exactly what I am, than choose him in the comfortable dark." Calden tilted his head. "I am cruel, champion, but I am not a liar. He is not cruel, but everything he says to you in that soft voice of his is, in its own way, a lie. Choose accordingly." He bowed a shallow, mocking bow, and he turned, and he left. The door of the antechamber closed. Mareska stood in the center of the room with her hand pressed flat to her sternum and her heart trying to climb out of her throat. A womb. They had wanted a womb. And one of the 2 men who had told her 2 different versions of the same truth was lying, and she did not yet know which one. Behind her, on the small writing desk by the high window, a folded square of paper lay where it had not been a moment before. She had not seen Calden place it there. She had not seen anyone place it there, but it was there, and her name was written across the front in a hand she had never seen before, in ink the dark red-brown of dried blood. She crossed to the desk. She unfolded the paper. There were 6 words on it, in the same dark rust hand. They lied to you about Brenvar. The bell thing in her chest went very, very still. She read the 6 words 7 times before she folded the paper again. They lied to you about Brenvar. Mireska sat down on the edge of the great furred bed because her legs had decided, without consulting her, that they were finished. She held the folded paper between her thumb and forefinger and stared at the 8-pointed star inlaid in the marble floor and tried to make her mind do the thing it had always done at Brenvar when a problem was too large to be held. In one hand at a time. Break it down. Lay the pieces out. Look at each piece without letting any other piece distract you. Piece 1. The hospice of Brenvar had burned 5 years ago. She had been 18 years old. She had been outside the walls, gathering the late winter saxifrage for Sister Velis's joint poultices when the glow first showed in the high windows. By the time she ran back, the gates were sealed from the inside, and the bell tower had already collapsed inward across the dormitory roof. 7 sisters had died. The sisterhood's mother house in the lowlands had ruled it an accident, a candle untended, an old building, a winter wind. Mireska had grieved and had eventually believed them, because what else was there to believe? Piece 2. She had not been an ordinary novice at Brenvar. The sisters had taken her in as an infant, left in the snow at the eastern gate with no token and no letter, and they had raised her with a particular and unspoken care. She had been taught to read in 3 languages when other novices were taught in 1. She had been taught the old laws of Corvath when other novices were taught only the rules of the sisterhood. She had been taught the sword, in secret, by Sister Velis herself, who had been a paladin of the Northern Crown before she took her vows. None of these things had been explained to her. She had learned young not to ask. Piece 3. The eldest of the sisters, Mother Teresa, had eyes the color of wet slate, the same color as Mireska's own. Mireska had assumed, for years, that this was a coincidence. The sisters had told her, once, that her parents were unknown. Piece 4. Mother Teresa had been the one who, 2 months after the fire, had come to Mireska in the temporary lodgings the sisterhood had taken in the lowland village. Mother Teresa, who had been outside the walls that night also, on a separate errand to a dying farmer's wife, and had pressed a small leather purse of coin into her hand, and had said, "Go south, child. Go to the solstice trial when it is announced. Win it if you can, and whatever happens, do not say the name Brenvar in the hearing of the twin crowns until you know who set the fire." She had said yes. She had asked who set the fire. Mother Teresa had not answered. Mother Teresa had vanished into the mountain roads that same week and had not been heard of since. Mireska had told herself, for 5 years, that the old woman had been confused by grief. Piece 5. The note in her hand had been written in a hand she had never seen before, in ink she had never seen before, by a person who had apparently entered her guarded chambers without being seen by any of the 7 guards posted to watch her. And the note knew that times, Brenvar times, was a word that mattered. Mireska closed her hand around the folded paper. She did not know, yet, what the note meant, but she knew, with a clarity that arrived at the same time as the bell thing's silence, that Mother Teresa had not been confused, and that the fire at Brenvar had not been an accident, and that whoever the writer of the note was, they were the third party at this table, the one neither king had mentioned, the one watching from somewhere she could not see. She tucked the paper into the lining of her boot. She rose from the bed. She crossed to the copper bath, which had cooled by now, and she washed the dried blood from her jaw and the dust of the Colosseum from her arms. She braided her wheat-pale hair tight against her skull. She put on the simple linen dress the council had laid out for her, because she did not yet know what to do, and she had learned, at Brenvar, that when you did not know what to do, You began with the smallest correct action and waited for the next one to reveal itself. The next one revealed itself 2 hours later, in the form of a knock at the antechamber door. It was not a king this time. The wolf who entered was old, older than the regent, older than any wolf she had ever seen still walking. His hair was white and thin against his scalp, his back stooped, his hands speckled with the brown spots of long age. He wore the gray robes of an archivist of the Ash Council, and he carried a single thin volume bound in dark leather. He did not bow, he did not introduce himself. He limped across the marble floor to the small writing desk and laid the volume down on it, and then he turned to her with eyes that were not old at all, eyes that were a sharp, attentive black, the black of a young raven, and he said, "Champion, my name is Archivist Hessek. I have 9 minutes before the guards remember to wonder why an archivist has been left alone with you. Listen carefully and do not interrupt." Myreska did not interrupt. The solstice trial of this year was not the first to be revived in the last decade, Hessek said. His voice was thin but precise. 9 years ago, when the High King died without heir, the Ash Council convened in secret and made a covenant. The twin crowns must be rejoined. The mechanism of the Elder Rite was the only mechanism by which they could be rejoined without civil war. A champion would be sought, a union would be made, an heir would be born. This part you will hear from other sources within the week, and it is true. He paused, very briefly, and Myreska understood that he was watching to see whether she would crumble at the confirmation. She did not crumble. She held his black raven eyes and waited. He went on. What you will not hear from other sources is this. The covenant required that the champion be a woman of no house, a foundling, an orphan, a wolf of unknown blood. This was politically necessary, so that no existing faction could claim the heir as theirs. But it was also magically necessary, because the old binding right of the Elder Rite requires the bound mate to have what the old texts call, times the unbroken thread, times a bloodline that has not been recorded, named, or sworn into any existing pack allegiance. Such bloodlines are extraordinarily rare. The council searched for 9 years. They found me, Myreska said quietly. They did not find you, champion. Hessek's mouth tightened. They times you. 23 years ago, an infant was given to the Sisters of the White Pine at Brenvar by a person whose identity is recorded in a single sealed document held in the deep archive of the Ash Council. That document has 3 signatures on it. One belonged to the late High King. One belonged to the woman who was at that time the abbess of Brenvar. The third belonged to the chief archivist of the council, who was my master, and who taught me to read these documents 30 years before he died. Myreska's hand had risen, again without her noticing, to press flat against her sternum. I am the daughter of the High King, she said. You are the daughter of the late High King, Hessek said, and of a woman whose name is also in that document, and whom I will not name in this room because the walls of this tower listen. You are not a foundling, you are an heir. The solstice trial of this year was not a search for a womb. Champion, that is the lie Calden of Halmanreach has been told, and the lie he is now repeating to you, because he believes it. The trial was a search for times you. Specifically, the covenant required that you be raised in ignorance of your own blood, that you grow strong on your own, and that you win the trial by your own hand, because the old binding right will not seal an heir of mixed crown unless the mother is herself a willing sovereign of independent will. You had to choose to fight. You had to choose to win. You had to choose to claim a name. That was the test. The bell thing in Myreska's chest was no longer humming. It was ringing a clear, sustained, terrible note, like a tuning fork held against bone. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. And not the council. Because the council does not yet know that I know, Hessek said, and because the covenant has been broken. He limped 1 step closer to her. The black raven eyes did not blink. The fire at Brenvar 5 years ago was set by an agent of one of the 2 kings, on the order of one of the 2 kings, in an attempt to destroy you before you came of age and entered the trial. The 7 sisters who died were murdered to ensure no one survived who could tell you the truth of your blood. Mother Teresa survived only by accident. She has been hunted ever since. She is alive currently in a place I will not name. She is the one who sent me to you. Which king? Mareska said. Her voice had gone flat. She did not recognize it. Hessek looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is the question whose answer will determine whether this realm survives the next year. And I do not yet know it. You, times will need to determine it. You have 2 nights and 1 day. You will have a guide, although not me, I am too watched. Tomorrow, at the 3rd hour past noon, a serving woman will come to your chambers with a tray of red apples. She will not speak. She will set down the tray, and on the tray, beneath the apples, you will find a token. You will know it when you see it. The token will tell you who to trust. Until then, trust no one, not the kings, not the regent, not me again. Burn this conversation from your face the moment I leave. Wait, Mireska said. The note was rising in her chest. The bell thing. She could feel it climbing toward her throat. Wait. The thing in me. The thing I have felt since the hospice burned. The hum, the warmth, the blood fire, Hessek said. He smiled for the first time, and his smile was as old and tired and gentle as the rest of him. Yes, champion, that is what your mother left you. It is the mark of the High King's line. It does not pass through every generation, but when it passes whole. The kings do not have it. The council does not have it. That times is why no fighter in the trial could land a killing blow on you. Not because of instructions, because of you. Calden lied. He did not know he was lying. The trial was real. You won it because you were always going to win it. You are the last living wolf in the twin crowns who carries the blood fire of the High King, and that is the thing the Covenant could not predict and could not control. And it is the thing that will, in the end, save you or end you. He turned. He was already moving toward the door. Archivist, she said. He paused. He did not turn back. How do I know, she said, that times are not the 3rd lie, that you are not the deepest of the 3 of them. Hessek's white head tilted, very slightly. He spoke without looking at her. You do not know, he said. That is the test I cannot remove from you. You will have to decide. The token tomorrow will help. Mother Teresa, if you reach her, will help. Your own blood, if you trust it, will help. But the choosing is yours. It was always going to be yours. That is the whole point of the trial. He limped out. The door of the antechamber closed. Mireska stood alone in a room with a copper bath and a feast on a low table and a folded square of paper hidden in the lining of her boot. And she pressed both hands over her sternum and listened to the blood fire ring against her ribs like a struck bell, and she understood, finally, what the trial had actually been for. It had been for her to find out what she was. The kings had thought it was a marriage market. The council had thought it was a covenant. The 3rd party in the high gallery, whoever they were, had thought it was a hunt. And Mother Teresa, 400 miles north in a place no one had named, had known all along that it was none of those things. It was a coronation. The bell thing rang once more, very hard, and outside the high narrow window of the champion's tower the 2nd moon was rising, a pale and patient eye over the city of Corvath, and somewhere, in a chamber she could not see, a hand she could not see was folding a 2nd letter and sealing it with red-brown wax. The next 2 days were going to decide everything. And Mireska, of no house, who was not, it turned out, of no house at all, finally understood that she was not the prize of this story. She was the throne. She did not sleep that 2nd night. She lay on her back on the great furred bed with her eyes open to the painted constellations and her hands folded on her stomach and her mind running, again and again, the same cold corridor of thought. 2 kings had claimed her. One had told her she was bait. One had told her he would set her free. An archivist had told her she was the daughter of a dead High King and the only living carrier of a fire that had not walked the world in a generation. A note in red-brown ink had told her that the sisters who raised her had lied. Mother Teresa was alive. Mother Teresa was hunted. Mother Teresa had sent for her. And in 26 hours, the second moon would rise full over the sundering Colosseum, and she would be required to stand on the white tiles before 40,000 wolves and speak a name aloud, the name of the king she chose, and the name she spoke would either save the realm or unmake it, and she did not yet know which name was which. She rose before dawn. She washed her face in the basin by the high window. She braided her wheat-pale hair tight against her skull. She put on the simple linen dress again, because it was the dress of a wolf without a house, and until she knew which house she belonged to, she would wear no other. She sat at the small writing desk and waited for the day to begin. The third hour past noon arrived very slowly. The serving woman who came was younger than Mareska had expected, perhaps her own age, perhaps a year or two older, with dark hair cut short to her jaw and the soft, careful movements of a person who had learned to be invisible. She wore the gray and white livery of the council kitchens. She carried a wooden tray on which were arranged 7 red apples, each polished to a hard shine, and a small ceramic dish of honey, and a folded white cloth. She did not look at Mireska. She set the tray on the writing desk. She bowed the bow of a kitchen servant to a noblewoman, neither too low nor too high. She turned to leave. At the door of the antechamber she paused. She did not turn back. She spoke only once, very quietly, in a voice meant only for Mireska's ears. "Eat the bottom apple last," she said, "and forgive me." She was gone before Mireska could answer. Mireska did not move for a long count. The guards in the corridor would expect her to begin eating. Servants reported back what champions did and did not consume, and refusal of food was the first sign of a nervous prisoner. She lifted the topmost apple and bit into it. The flesh was crisp and sweet, and tasted of the late southern orchards. She chewed slowly. She chewed through the second apple, and the third, and the fourth, and she did not allow her hands to shake even when the bell thing in her chest began to hum again, very softly, the way a string hums in a room where someone is about to enter. She lifted the 7th apple. Beneath it, on the wooden tray, lay a single dried sprig of saxifrage. The late winter saxifrage, the same flower she had been gathering outside the walls of Brenvar on the night the hospice burned. The flower used in Sister Velis's joint poultices. The flower no other house in the realm gathered, because it grew only on the eastern slopes of the Brenvar peaks, and Sister Velis was the only wolf in 300 miles who had known the trick of pressing it without crushing the medicine out of it. The sprig had been pressed in exactly Sister Velis's way. Sister Velis, who had been one of the 7 who died in the fire. Mireska closed her hand around the sprig and pressed it to her sternum, over the bell thing, and she understood in the way one understands, without being told that the serving woman with the dark-cut hair had not been a serving woman, and that the saxifrage had not been pressed by Sister Velis, who was dead, but by someone Sister Velis had taught. There had been one novice at Brenvar, 2 years older than Mireska, who had been Sister Velis's particular pupil, a quiet girl with dark hair and careful hands. Her name had been Yseri. She had left the hospice the year before the fire to take her vows at the mother house in the lowlands. Yseri had not been at Brenvar the night it burned. Yseri had also not, Mireska now realized, been at the mother house. The sisterhood would have written. The sisterhood always wrote. Yseri had been somewhere else for 5 years, doing something else, on someone's instruction. The hum in Mireska's chest sharpened to a clean note, like a singer finding the right pitch. She lifted the white cloth folded on the corner of the tray. Beneath it was a small folded square of paper, no larger than her thumbnail. She unfolded it. It said only, "Tonight. 2nd hour past midnight. Northwest stairwell. Trust the king who tells you the truth about the fire." She held the paper over the candle on the writing desk and watched it burn. She ate the 7th apple. The summons came at the 11th hour of the evening, 2 hours before midnight, from the regent. Both kings would dine with her, privately, in the small audience chamber adjoining the champion's tower. The council had decided, in its wisdom, that before the binding tomorrow night, the champion should be allowed to converse with both her suitors at the same table, in a setting of equal courtesy, so that no later challenge could be raised that one had been favored over the other. The regent's letter, delivered by a herald with eyes like a held breath, did not phrase it as an invitation. It phrased it as a duty. Mireska went. The small audience chamber was not small. It was a long room with a high ceiling and a single table set for three, lit by a single chandelier that held 40 white candles. The two kings were already standing when she entered. Drevin to the left of the table, in the gray and silver of his crown, the iron circlet on his brow again. Calden to the right in black and crimson, the antlered crown set straight tonight, no longer rakish. They did not look at each other, they both looked at her. She bowed, the third line bow to each in turn. She took the seat at the head of the table, the seat the council had set for her, the seat of the champion, equal in protocol tonight to any king in the realm. The food came. She did not eat it. The kings did not eat either. They drank wine. Slowly, from cups they did not refill. Drevin watched her over the rim of his cup, with his amber eyes steady and patient. Calden watched her with his river ice eyes and the smile that was not a smile. She set both her palms flat on the table. "I will speak first," she said. Drevin inclined his head. Calden's mouth twitched. "By all means, champion." "I have been told, in the last day, 3 different versions of why the solstice trial was held this year." Her voice was even. She had practiced evenness against the painted constellations all night. "I have been told that I am a womb the council needed for an heir. I have been told that I am bait the council needed to draw a faction into the open. I have been told that I am the daughter of the late High King, raised in ignorance, and that the trial was a coronation in disguise. Each of these versions was told to me by someone who claims to know the truth and to be telling it to me out of care for my person." She paused. "One of you told me one of those versions. Both of you knew, before tonight, the version the other had told. I would like, before I choose between you, to hear from each of you the one thing you have not yet told me." "And what is the thing?" Calden said softly. "We have not yet told you." "What you know," Mireska said, "about the fire at Brenvar." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that had a shape. Drevin set his cup down very carefully on the table. The amber of his eyes did not move from her face, but something behind it changed, a banking down of a fire, or perhaps the lighting of one. He spoke first, and he spoke slowly. "5 years ago," he said, "a courier of my northern court was killed on the high road through the Brenvar Pass. He was carrying a sealed report from a man I had placed at the lowland mother house of the Sisters of the White Pine. The report concerned the welfare of a foundling who had been raised at the Brenvar Hospice, whose name and origin I had been quietly investigating for 3 years prior, on the basis of a rumor I had heard from an old archivist in my own court, an archivist who has since died of natural causes, although I have always wondered. The courier's body was never found. The report was never recovered. 2 weeks later, the hospice burned. I had nothing to do with the burning. I have spent 5 years trying to learn who did. I have not, until this hour, succeeded." He paused. "I will tell you also," he said, "that the foundling I was investigating was you, and that the rumor I had heard concerned the woman who was, in those days, a lady of my own father's court before she fled north, a woman who, the rumor said, had borne a child to the late High King in secret and given it into the keeping of the sisters before disappearing into the eastern mountains. I never confirmed the rumor. I tried to. I sent a courier. The courier died. I have been afraid ever since that my interest in you was the thing that killed 7 women I never met." He stopped. His hand rested very still beside his cup. The iron circlet caught the candlelight along its edge. Mireska turned her head, very slowly, to the southern king. Calden was no longer smiling. He was looking at Drevin, and the river ice eyes had gone a shade. Mireska could not name a green that was not amusement and not malice, but something colder, something she suspected very few people had ever seen on his face. You, Calden said softly to Drevin, have just admitted, in the hearing of the champion of the Solstice trial, that you have known her parentage for 3 years and concealed it from the Ash Council. I have, Drevin said. That is treason, Calden said. It is, Drevin said. The bell thing in Mireska's chest was singing. A high, thin, terrible note. She did not let it show. Your Majesty of Halmanreach, she said. Your turn. Calden looked at her. The green came back to itself. The smile returned. Smaller, sadder. I will tell you the thing I have not told you, champion, although it does me less credit than it does my dear cousin. He set his own cup down. I knew of the fire before it happened. I did not order it. I did not set it. But a man in my pay sent me a letter, 3 days before the burning, informing me that an action would be taken at Brenvar to remove a complication from the field of the coming covenant, and asking whether I objected. I did not reply. My silence was taken, as silence often is, for consent. I did not know, at the time, what the complication was. I learned only after the fact that 7 women had died and a foundling had survived. I learned only this winter when the council announced the solstice trial that the foundling was the complication, and that she had been spared by accident, and that she was on her way to the Colosseum. I did not have you investigated, champion. I did not need to. The man in my pay had already done it, on his own initiative, and his report sat in my desk for 6 weeks before I read it. When I read it, I understood what I had let happen by my silence, and I came to Corvath, and I claimed the elder right. Because I judged, as I still judge, that you would be safer bound to a man who had let your home burn through cowardice than to a man who had been times investigating times you for 3 years from a foreign court. That, Drevin said quietly, is not a defense. It is not, Calden agreed. It is a confession. The champion asked for the thing we had not told her. I have told her mine. The silence in the chamber was no longer the silence of held breath. It was the silence of a room in which 3 people had just placed 3 different blades on the table between them, and were waiting, courteously, to see which one would be picked up first. Mireska did not pick up either blade. She rose from the table. She bowed the 3rd-line bow to each king in turn, with no more and no less courtesy than she had given them at the entrance. Thank you, she said, for the truth. Both of you. I will speak my choice at the binding tomorrow night. She walked out of the small audience chamber. Her hands did not shake until she was through the door. Behind her, neither king moved. She did not need to see their faces to know that the look they exchanged across the table after the door closed was the look of 2 predators who had finally agreed on which of them was about to be hunted. It was not either of them. She reached the northwest stairwell at the 2nd hour past midnight. Exactly. The stairwell was older than the champion's tower around it, a service stair from the original fortress on which the tower had been built, narrow and unlit and smelling of cold stone. She had walked it without a torch. Her eyes had adjusted in the long hour before. Her wolf, whatever shape of wolf she carried, saw better in the dark than the wolves of the kings. There was a woman waiting on the 3rd landing. She wore the same gray and white kitchen livery as the morning serving woman, but the dark hair was no longer cut to the jaw, it was pinned up, severe, in the style of a senior steward of the council kitchens, with iron pins in it that Mireska recognized from 20 paces as not, in fact, kitchen pins. Yseri, Mireska said. Yseri's mouth tightened. The careful invisibility she had worn at the apple tray was gone. What remained was something harder, something Mireska remembered from the older novices of Brenvar, the look of a person who had spent years being someone other than herself, and was only sometimes allowed to put the false self down. Mireska, you did not die at the mother house. I never went to the mother house. Mother Teresa sent me south the year before the fire. She had begun to suspect. Suspect what? That the late High King's old enemies had finally located the foundling at Brenvar, Yseri said. She did not know who. She did not know how. She knew only that someone in the lowlands had begun asking the kind of questions one asks before one decides to remove a person from the world. She sent me ahead, into Corvath, into the kitchens of the council itself, to be a pair of eyes near the regent. I have been here 4 years. I am the reason the archivist Hessek knew where to find you yesterday. She paused. And I am the reason Mother Teresa is alive tonight. I have been moving her, slowly, between safe houses in the eastern foothills since the year of the burning. She is 6 hours' hard ride from the city. She will not survive much longer where she is. She has been waiting to see whether you would survive the trial. You have. Now she is waiting to see whether you will survive the binding. Tell me how to reach her. I will not. Yeseri's jaw was iron. Not yet. The binding tomorrow night is the last chance to break this open before the council makes you a queen of either crown. If you are bound to either king before we move, Mother Teresa will be killed within the week, because her testimony will become the only thing that can unmake the binding, and whoever burned the hospice will not allow it to stand uncontested. We have one night, champion. One. She drew a breath. Tell me which of them you mean to choose. Neither, Mareska said. Yseri's eyes closed for a half-second. When they opened, the iron in them had softened, very slightly, into something Mareska recognized as relief. Good, Yseri said. Then listen. And there, in the cold stairwell, by the light of nothing but the dim landing torches 3 flights below, the false serving woman of the council kitchens told the champion of the solstice trial what was going to happen the following night, and what part she would have to play, and what name she would have to refuse to speak, and Mareska of No House, who had once been a foundling and had now begun to suspect she was something else, listened, with both her hands pressed flat to the stones of the stairwell wall and the bell thing in her chest ringing, ringing, ringing like a bell rung in welcome of a thing it had been waiting for all its life. When Yseri finished speaking, the second moon was already past its zenith, and there were 19 hours left until the binding. The morning came too slowly, and the afternoon came too fast, the way time moves on the day before a battle. Mireska sat at the small writing desk by the high window of the champion's tower and watched the light move across the marble floor, and she did the small correct actions, one at a time, in the order Yseri had given her. She ate the breakfast the kitchens sent. She drank the tea, although not much of it. She accepted the visit of the council's robe mistress, who came at the 8th hour with 3 women carrying a gown of pale gray silk shot with silver thread, the gown of the champion's binding. Made the same way for 900 years, the shoulders cut high and the throat cut low, and the hem long enough to trail behind her on the white tiles when she walked the long path to the dais. Mireska stood in the center of the room and was measured and pinned and adjusted and turned, and she said only the words a champion was expected to say, and she did not let her face do anything other than what the robe mistress expected to see. She accepted, at the 10th hour, the visit of the regent. Old Veshon came alone, leaning on his ironwood staff, with the age in his face that she had not noticed before, a deep, gray weariness that no amount of statecraft could quite cover anymore. He sat in the chair opposite hers at the writing desk. He folded his hands over the head of his staff. Champion, he said, the council has been advised that you intend to speak your binding tonight, as the law requires, and that you will not break the law of the elder right or contest the claim of either king. Is this correct? It is, Lord Regent. You understand, he said, that whichever king you choose, the realm will require you to bear a child within 3 years. That is the terms of the covenant. The covenant has held the twin crowns in trust for 9 years. It cannot hold them another 9. You are aware of this. I am, Lord Regent. He looked at her for a long moment. There was a thing in his eyes that she had not expected, not malice, not calculation, not even the cool politeness of a man doing his duty. There was times grief. The same grief, she thought, that an old man feels when he has spent the last 9 years arranging the marriage of a girl whose face he has never been allowed to know, and has finally, on the morning of the wedding, met her in person, and has discovered that she is not a piece on a board after all, but a woman, and has discovered too late that the discovery does not change anything he has done. I am sorry, child, he said. I would have done it differently if I could. I could not. He rose. He left. She did not rise to see him out. She did not know whether the regent had been Hessex master's friend, or his enemy, or only as old men in long offices often were both things at once across 40 years. She did not need to know yet. She would need to know by tonight. The 11th hour came. The 12th. The light along the marble floor began to redden. At the 13th hour she was dressed in the gown of the champion's binding, and her wheat-pale hair was unbraided and combed loose down her back, the way an unmarried champion's hair was worn in the old paintings, and her 2 sabers were laid in their double scabbard across her shoulders, not as weapons, the robe mistress had explained, but as the symbols of the trial she had won, to be unbuckled and laid at the foot of the dais before she spoke her king's name. She did not unbuckle them. She walked the long corridor of the champion's tower, with the scabbard across her back and the silk hem of the gown trailing behind her. And the 7 guards who had watched her for 3 nights fell into step around her in a loose escort, and the corridor opened into the great hall, and the great hall opened into the night. The sundering Colosseum had not been lit like this in 900 years. Every chandelier was burning. Every sconce along the high walls was burning. The wind stones had been brought low, ringing the white tiles of the binding circle in a silver mesh of light. The tiered benches were full again, full as they had been on the night of her victory, but the noise was different. The crowd of 40,000 wolves was hushed, expectant, a low murmur that shifted and flowed but never broke into a roar, because tonight was not a victory but a sealing. And the laws of the binding required the crowd to witness in something closer to reverence than to celebration. The twin thrones were filled, Dreven on the left in his gray and silver, the iron circlet on his brow, his amber eyes finding her the moment she entered the long path, and not leaving her. He looked, tonight, more tired than he had on the night of her victory. His hands rested on the arms of the throne, very still. He was waiting for her to walk to him, and she could times feel, through whatever new thing was awake in her chest, that he had decided, at some point in the last 24 hours, that she was going to choose him, and that he had let himself believe it, and that he was sitting on his throne, with the small-held breath of a man who has begun to want a thing he was not supposed to want. Calden on the right in his black and crimson, the antlered crown set straight again, his river ice eyes also on her, and a smile that was, for the first time, almost weary. He did not look like a man who expected to win. He looked like a man who had decided, sometime in the night, that whether he won or lost, he was going to behave tonight like a king, because the realm was watching, and because a man who could let a hospice burn through silence could at least, on the night of the binding, hold his crown straight on his head. Behind and above them, the regent, old Vishan, his parchment face unreadable. Mireska reached the foot of the dais. She did not kneel. The protocol required her to kneel. She did not. A ripple went through the high gallery, a sound like wind through dry grass. The regent's hand tightened, very slightly, on his staff. He did not yet speak. Lord Regent, Mireska said. Her voice was clear and steady. The wind stones carried it across the Colosseum without her raising it. I am the champion of the solstice trial of this year. I have come to the binding circle at the appointed hour, dressed in the gown of the binding, with the sabers of my trial across my back. I have come to speak the words the law requires of me, but before I speak them, I claim the elder right also. The wind through dry grass became something stronger. The elder right, the regent said carefully, is reserved to the alpha kings of the realm, champion. It is reserved, Mireska said, to any sworn sovereign of the realm whose blood is recognized in the founding compact. The compact lists 3 sovereigns. The crown of Vosk Alder, the crown of Halmanreach, and the crown of the High King, which has lain vacant these 9 years, and whose right has been held in trust by the Ash Council. The hush in the Colosseum was absolute now. Even the murmur was gone. I claim the third right, Mireska said. I claim it as the daughter of the late High King and of the woman whose name is recorded in the sealed document of the Deep Archive, signed by my father, by the Abbess of Brenvar, and by the chief archivist of your council. I have been raised in ignorance of my blood for 23 years. I have come of age. I have won the solstice trial. I claim the high crown. And by claiming it, I claim the elder right over myself, which no other sovereign of the realm may now contest, and I name no king as my mate tonight, because the high crown is older than either twin and chooses its own. She drew a breath. The blood fire in her chest was no longer a hum. It was a time's light. She could feel it climbing up the columns of her bones, brightening behind her eyes, surging out along the line of her unbound hair. She knew, without looking down, that her skin was beginning to glow, a soft pale light, the color of wet slate, the color of her own eyes, the color of Mother Teresa's eyes, the color of the late High King's eyes, in the old portraits hung in the high gallery she had never seen. And as the high crown, she said, I make my first decree of office. The light from her was bright enough now that the wolves in the front benches were shielding their eyes. The hospice of Brenvar of the White Pine was burned 5 years ago by an act of murder. 7 of the sisters of the White Pine were killed. The order was given by a person whose name I will speak now, in the hearing of this Colosseum and the witness of the realm, and the person named will answer for it before the laws of the High Crown. The regent's staff dropped from his hands and rang on the marble of the dais. He did not bend to retrieve it. He had gone the color of the parchment of his own face. The order, Mireska said, was given by Lord Regent Veshen of the Ash Council, in the autumn of the year of the High King's death, on the grounds that the foundling at Brenvar was an inconvenient claimant to a covenant he had decided would proceed without her. He sent 2 men. Both are dead now, although not by his hand. The sisters of the White Pine survived him through one of their own, who escaped the fire and has lived in hiding for 5 years, and who will be brought into this Colosseum tonight to give her testimony. She lifted her right hand. The doors at the far end of the long path opened. Yseri came through first, in the dark gray of a steward of the High Crown, a livery that had not been worn in 9 years, that someone had been quietly preparing in the corner of a kitchen for many months. She walked slowly, but she walked steady. Behind her, leaning on her arm, came an old woman in the white robes of the sisters, her hair iron gray, her back stooped, her eyes the color of wet slate. Mother Teresa. The Colosseum did not breathe. Mother Teresa walked the long path on Yseri's arm. She did not look at the kings. She did not look at the regent. She looked the entire way at Mireska, and her face, her old, lined, careful face that Mireska had not seen in 5 years, did the thing it had only ever done in private. In the small chamber where she had taught Mireska to read at 3 years old, it folded into a smile so tired and so glad that Mireska's blood fire flickered for the first time, almost guttered, and then steadied. Mother Teresa reached the foot of the dais. She bowed not the third-line bow, but the deep bow of a sister of the White Pine, to the recognized blood of the High Crown. Yseri bowed beside her. My queen, Mother Teresa said. Her voice was thin, and it carried. The blood fire surged. Mother, Mireska said. Behind them, in the high gallery, a single figure rose from the screened seats of the council's witnesses and began, very quietly, to walk toward the inner doors. Mireska did not see them, but the bell thing in her chest rang one more time, sharp and discordant, and she understood, half a heartbeat too late, that she had named the wrong conspirator. The regent had given the order to send the 2 men. The regent had not given the order to set the fire. The order to set the fire, the order that had killed 7 women, and not one had been given by the figure now walking, unhurried, toward the inner doors. And that figure was about to leave the Colosseum. Stop them. Mireska's voice cut across the Colosseum. She did not know yet that the figure was a woman, or what livery she wore, or what name she carried. She knew only the discord, the wrong note in her blood fire, and she knew that Yseri, who had stood at the foot of the dais a half-breath before, had already turned and was already moving. The crowd was beginning, finally, to understand that something was wrong. The murmur built into a confused roar. 40,000 wolves stood. The council guards along the high gallery turned, looking to the regent for orders that the regent, still standing on the dais with his hands empty of his staff and his face the color of wet ash, was not in any condition to give. In the screened gallery of the council's witnesses, the figure reached the inner doors. A guard there moved to open them. The guard fell. He fell without a cry, a clean drop to the stones, and the figure stepped over him and through the door and was, for a moment, lost to sight. Mareska moved. She did not think about it. The blood fire in her chest was no longer a light. It was a current, and the current ran down her arms and into her hands, and she reached up, in one smooth motion, and pulled the twin sabers from the double scabbard across her back. The silk gown of the binding tore along its careful seams as she shifted her shoulders. She did not care. She vaulted from the foot of the dais, 8 feet of marble step, cleared in a single bound that was not the bound of an ordinary wolf, in ordinary form, and she landed on the white tiles already running. "Champion!" the regent cried, finding his voice. "Champion! Do not hold him," Mireska said, not looking back. And the two of them, Yseri and Mother Teresa, the one running ahead of her toward the inner door, the other, settling herself slowly against the foot of the dais with her thin hand raised, both knew that times was the regent, and that the order was to keep him on his throne until Mireska returned. Mother Teresa's hand on her staff was not the hand of a frail old woman. It was the hand of a sister of the White Pine, and she had been a paladin once, and her power was thin now, but it was still there. And the regent, who had been about to step from the dais, found his feet would not move. Behind Mireska, on the twin thrones, both kings rose. "Dreven," she said without turning as she reached the long path. "Kalden, with me or behind. Choose." She did not wait to see which they chose. She ran. The inner door of the screened gallery led into a service passage, a dark, narrow corridor used by the council's witness keepers to move unseen through the Colosseum's bones. The figure was already 3 turns ahead. Yseri was a black shape 10 paces in front of Mireska, moving fast and silent. Mireska heard, behind her, the heavier footfalls of 2 kings and their guards beginning to follow, but she did not slow. The corridor turned again, opened onto a small antechamber where a side door stood ajar, the night air of Corvath cold beyond it. The figure had reached the door. In the antechamber, by the light of a single guttering torch, Mireska finally saw who she was chasing. It was a woman, tall, gray-haired, in the deep blue robes of the council's archivist branch. Her face was familiar. Mireska had seen her once, in the high gallery on the night of the victory, sitting in the screened seats, had not registered her, had not asked who she was. The face was lined and intelligent and entirely calm. "Stop," Mireska said. The woman in the blue robes turned. She looked at Mireska. She looked at the blood fire glowing in Mireska's skin. She looked at the twin sabers held loose and ready in Mireska's hands. And her face did a thing Mireska had not expected. It softened into something almost like tenderness, as if she were looking at a child she had known a long time. "Hello, Mireska," she said. "You have your father's eyes." The blood fire stuttered. "Who are you?" Mireska said. "My name is Archivist Vela of the Deep Archive of the Ash Council." The woman's voice was perfectly even. "I was the chief archivist's assistant the year you were born. I was the 3rd signatory to the document that placed you at Brenvar. Although my signature is no longer on the surviving copy, your archivist friend Hessick does not know that. I burned the original and copied it. He has the copy. The copy has only 2 signatures." She tilted her head, very slightly. "I gave the order to burn the hospice. The regent did not. The regent only sent the men, and the men were mine before they were his. I have served the Ash Council for 41 years, champion. I have served the realm. I burned 7 women because 7 women were not as important as a kingdom." "You are about to be the 8th, Mireska said. "I do not think so." Vela of the Deep Archive smiled. The smile was the smile of a woman who had been preparing for this conversation for 23 years. You will not strike me down, Mireska. You will hesitate. You will hesitate because you are your mother's daughter as well as your father's, and your mother was a woman who could not strike down the one who had raised her either. I was your mother's tutor, in the deep archive of the High King's court. I taught her her letters. I taught her her laws. I taught her the way the realm worked. And when the High King died and the realm threatened to tear itself in half, I made the only choice the realm could afford. I placed you. I burned the hospice when it became clear the sisters had begun to ask questions I could not answer. I have arranged the trial. I have arranged the kings. I have arranged, until tonight, every piece of the board on which you have walked. I have done all of this for the realm, champion, and for you, and for the line of your father. Behind Mireska, the kings reached the antechamber. She heard Dreven's quick, indrawn breath as he understood, and Calden's softer, sharper one. She did not turn. You arranged the kings, Mireska said. I arranged for both kings to invoke the elder rite. Yes. Vela's smile remained perfectly steady. I arranged for them to invoke it on the same night so that you would be forced to refuse them both. I arranged for Hesek to find you so that you would learn of your blood. I arranged for Useri to plant the saxifrage so that you would trust her enough to listen. I arranged for Mother Teresa to be retrieved from her hiding place tonight so that you would have a witness on the long path. I arranged for the regent to give the order to send the men, 23 years ago, so that I would have a name to give you tonight, when you finally times, claimed the high crown. You have done everything I needed you to do, champion. You have done it perfectly. And now you will let me leave this Colosseum, because you cannot afford to kill the only living wolf who knows where the rest of the men I have placed are buried. Mireska did not move. The blood fire in her chest was very loud. You are saying, she said carefully, that you have spent 41 years moving every piece on this board, that you set the fire that killed 7 of the women who raised me, and that I should let you walk out of this room because you have other men in other places. I am saying that the realm is not won in one night, Mireska. I am saying that the high crown you have just claimed is hollow until the men I have placed are accounted for. I am saying that I am the only person living who can give you those names, and that the price of those names is my life. It is not a complicated transaction. Your father would have made it without hesitating. Your mother, the smile flickered, just for a moment, into something almost human, almost grieved. Your mother would have hesitated, and would in the end have made it also. Mireska, Dreven said quietly behind her. Wait, Mireska said. She held the woman's gaze. The blood fire was singing now, climbing toward a pitch she had never heard before. The pitch, she realized distantly, of judgment. The thing the high crown was times for. Not war, not marriage, judgment. The blood fire was the old gift of the line of the high kings of Corvath, and what it did, when it was awake, in a sovereign of sufficient will, was let that sovereign know the truth of a thing being said in its presence. She let the fire rise. You did not do this for the realm, she said. Vela's smile did not move. You did this, Mireska said, because the late High King refused to marry you 43 years ago, and married my mother instead. And you have spent 43 years arranging the slow correction of his choice. You have not served the realm, archivist. You have served a wound. You have built a covenant on the body of a hospice and called it statecraft. You have arranged the lives of 2 kings, and the death of 7 women, and the 23 years of my ignorance, because you could not bear that he chose her. You will give me the names of the men you have placed because the high crown will compel them out of you. You will not be leaving this room. Vela's smile finally broke. It broke not into rage, but into something quieter, the small, exhausted recognition of a woman who has been outplayed by a child she herself had raised on a board she herself had built, and who is, in the last move of a 40-year game, no longer entirely certain she had wanted to win. He had your eyes also, Vela said softly. She moved, not toward the door, toward Mireska. With a thin curved knife that had been hidden in the sleeve of the blue robe, drawn fast, faster than a woman of her age should have been able to draw a knife, and Mireska understood. with a clarity that came too late, and not too late at the same time, that Vela of the Deep Archive had not intended to leave the Colosseum at all. She had intended to die in this antechamber. By her own hand, or by Mareska's, it did not matter. What mattered was that the names of the men she had placed died with her. Mireska's right saber moved before she thought. It did not strike the woman down. It struck the knife. The thin curved blade rang on the marble floor of the antechamber. Vela's hand, empty, hung in the air for half a heartbeat. Then Drevin was past Mireska fast, very fast, faster than Mireska had known he could move, and his hand closed on Vela's wrist, and he twisted it behind her back and lowered her, almost gently, to her knees on the cold stone. Calden of Halmanreach, arriving a half-step behind, did not put his hands on the archivist. He stood looking down at her with his river ice eyes empty of anything Mireska could read. "You will not die here, archivist," Mireska said. Her voice was the voice of the High Crown now, and it did not shake. "You will live. You will speak. You will give the names of every man you have placed in every house in the realm, and the High Crown will compel them out of you, slowly, over as many days as it takes. You served a wound. You will heal it before you sleep." Vela did not speak. She closed her eyes. She did not weep. She did not, Mireska thought, know how anymore. Drevin looked up. The amber of his eyes met Mireska's and held. "My queen," he said. It was not the question of a suitor, and it was not the courtesy of a king. It was the recognition of a wolf who had finally, after 36 years, met a sovereign he could kneel to without breaking himself in the kneeling. "My king of the north," Mireska answered. She turned her head. Calden of Halmanreach was already watching her. "And you," she said. He smiled. The smile was tired, and it was, this time, almost kind. "My queen," he said. He bowed. "I will not be your mate. I have known I would not be your mate since the moment you walked into the small audience chamber last night and asked the question I had hoped you would not ask. But I will be the southern crown that bends to the high, and I will return Halmanreach to the realm, and I will take my black and my red back to my own kingdom, and trouble you no more, if you will have it that way." "I will have it that way," Mireska said. The bell thing in her chest, which had been ringing all night, settled at last into a long, low chord, like the resolved note at the end of a hymn. Outside the antechamber, the Colosseum had gone silent again. The realm was waiting to see what would walk back out of the small door. Mireska looked at the kneeling archivist, at the king who had not lied to her and the king who had, at the steward in the dark gray livery of the High Crown standing in the corridor with her hand on the hilt of a knife she had not needed, and she understood that the binding tonight had been of a different kind than the one the council had written into law. She had bound, in the antechamber of the sundering Colosseum, the twin crowns to the high. And she had not, after all, married either king to do it. She drew a long breath, the first easy one in 3 nights. And she walked back toward the long path and the white tiles and the 40,000 wolves who had been shouting her name 3 nights ago and who were about to learn, in the next hour, that the name they had been shouting was not the name she had been born with. Behind her, in the antechamber, Drevin of Vosk Alder lifted Archivist Vela to her feet without unkindness, and Calden of Halmanreach picked up the thin curved knife from the marble floor and slid it into his own belt. And the 2 kings who had hated each other since they were 12 years old exchanged a single look across the body of a woman who had arranged both of their lives, and the look held. It was the first thing they had agreed on in 9 years. It would not be the last. The walk back along the long path was the longest walk Mireska had ever taken in her life. She walked it alone. Drevin and Calden remained in the antechamber with Archivist Vela and the guards who had finally caught up to them. Yseri walked 1 pace behind and to the left, the way a steward walked behind a sovereign. The torn silk of the binding gown trailed along the white tiles in a long, pale ribbon. Her wheat pale hair was loose around her shoulders, full of the dust of running. Her twin sabers were still in her hands. Her skin still glowed with the soft, slate-colored light of the blood fire, although the light had banked down now, settled into something steadier, no longer the climbing brightness of an awakening, but the held light of a thing that had finally come into its own shape. The 40,000 wolves of the sundering Colosseum did not move. They had heard, through the open inner door of the screened gallery, enough of the antechamber to know that something had ended out there, that the council had not planned. They had seen the regent held to his throne by the thin raised hand of an old sister of the white pine. They had seen the twin kings vanish through a service door behind the champion they had both claimed. They were waiting, in a silence so complete it had a weight to it, to learn what was coming back. What came back was Mareska. She walked the long path with her sabers in her hands and the blood fire in her skin, and she did not lower her eyes, and she did not bow at the third or seventh tile, and she did not kneel at the foot of the dais. She climbed it. Old Veshan, the regent, was still standing at the edge of the marble platform where Mother Tyressa had pinned him in place. His face, when Mareska reached him, was not the face of a man caught in a treason. It was the face of a man who had been, for 9 years, the unwilling steward of a covenant he had not designed and could not unmake, and who had just learned, in the same hour she had, that the woman who had truly designed it had been sitting 3 seats to his right at every council meeting for 40 years. He looked at Mareska. The grief in his eyes was deeper now. It was old grief uncovered, not new grief made. "My queen," he said, quietly, only for her. "Lord Regent." She did not raise her voice either. "You sent the men. She gave the order. The realm will hear both, in the proper hour, and the realm will judge both. Will you sit, until then, under the high crown?" "I will sit," he said, "and I will be glad of the sitting. I have been tired, a long time." Mother Teresa lowered her thin hand. The regent took his throne again. He did not look at the empty space on the right where Calden's throne stood. He did not look at the empty space on the left where Dreven's throne stood. He looked, only, at the floor between his feet, like a man who had finally been allowed to put down a stone he had been carrying for 9 years. Mireska turned to face the Colosseum. She did not need the windstones. The blood fire carried her voice farther than the windstones could have. "Citizens of the Twin Crowns," she said. "Lords of the 8 packs, sons and daughters of the free peoples." She paused, the way the heralds paused, and she let the pause settle. "3 nights ago I claimed a name and a house from the realm. Tonight I have claimed something larger, and the realm is owed an account of it. I will give that account." She gave it. She gave it slowly and clearly, the way Sister Velis had taught her to give a report of a wound, what was true, what was suspected, what was not yet known. She told them of the foundling at Brenvar and of the document in the deep archive. She told them of the fire and of the 7 who died and of the order to send the men and of the order, the older order, to set the flame. She told them of Archivist Vela, who was at this moment kneeling in an antechamber under the watch of 2 kings, and of the men Vela had placed across 40 years in the houses of the realm, whose names would be drawn out of her, in the days to come, under the compulsion of the high crown. She told them of the elder right and of the third right that the law had quietly preserved against the day a sovereign of the high line woke into her own. She told them, last, that she had not chosen a king to bind to. The crowd made a sound, at that not a roar, not a cheer, something more careful, the sound of 40,000 wolves who were thinking about what they had just been told. "I will not bind tonight," Mareska said. "Not to King Dreven of Vosgalder, not to King Calden of Halmanreach. The twin kings have agreed, and I am grateful. More than I can say in the open that the twin crowns will bend to the high, and that they will hold their own kingdoms in faith, and that the question of the high heir will be a question for the realm to resolve in its proper time, and not in the hurry of a covenant made 9 years ago in a closed room. The realm will have an heir when the realm has earned one, not before." The careful sound shifted. It was beginning, slowly, to climb towards something else. "I will tell you also," Mireska said, "that I do not yet know how to wear this crown. I was raised at a hospice in the eastern mountains. I was taught by a woman who is on the dais beside me now, and whom I will never again leave unguarded. I was taught by 6 other women who died because a covenant decided their lives were worth less than a marriage. I am 23 years old, and I have held a saber longer than I have held a scepter, and I will need the help of every honest wolf in the realm to learn the difference. I am asking for that help. I am not asking for fealty. I am asking for help. The climb in the crowd's sound stopped, hung for a moment, and broke not into the chaos she had feared, but into something stranger. A long, low, shared note, like the keening of wolves at a death and a birth at once. The bell thing in Mireska's chest, which had settled to a low chord in the antechamber, lifted again, not toward judgment this time, but toward something else. Something she did not have a name for, something old and warm and recognizing. The blood fire in her skin brightened, very slightly, and she understood that she was being times answered. The realm was answering her. 40,000 wolves of the twin crowns, under the eye of 2 empty thrones and 1 filled one, were making the old sound their grandmothers had made when a sovereign of the High Line had walked among them in the days before the sundering. The sound of recognition. The sound a pack made when it had found its alpha and had been waiting, without knowing it had been waiting, for the alpha to find it back. Mireska stood on the dais with her hands open at her sides and her sabers crossed at her feet and her loose hair full of dust, and she let the recognition wash over her, and she did not weep, because she had wept enough in 3 nights. But she let the blood fire ease open behind her sternum, like a hand unclenching after a long-held grip. She had not asked for a crown. She had asked for a name. The realm had given her both, and added the one she had not asked for on top. The remaking of the realm did not happen in a night. It happened across the autumn that followed, and through the winter, and into the spring. It happened slowly, the way the breaking of an old dam happens slowly, in the steady, measured releases of a thing that has been held back too long. Archivist Vela of the Deep Archive lived. She was not executed. The High Crown's first decree of state was that the woman who had arranged the deaths of 7 sisters of the White Pine and the 23 years of a sovereign's ignorance would not be granted the small mercy of a quick ending. She would be held at the council's deepest house, under the guard of the steward Yseri, and she would speak under the slow, steady compulsion of the blood fire, which could not draw a lie from a wolf, but could draw a name, every name of every man and woman she had placed in every house and every kitchen and every chancery of the realm across 41 years. The list grew long. It was still growing at the spring equinox. Each name, as it came, was sent on its quiet errand. A removal here, a confrontation there, a slow, patient unweaving of a web. A single wounded woman had spent 4 decades spinning. The Lord Regent Veshan was not removed from the Ash Council. He was kept on it, at his own request, because he knew where the bodies of 40 years of council statecraft were buried, and he wished to dig them up himself before he died. He died, as it happened, the following winter, at his desk, with a half-written letter to the High Queen still under his hand. The letter was an account of an old debt he had owed to a sister of the White Pine 40 years before. Mireska read it. She wept for the 2nd time in a year. She did not show the weeping to anyone except Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa did not return to the eastern mountains. She took quarters in the high seat of Corvath, and she became, without being asked and without asking, the first counselor of the High Crown, not by any title the council recognized, but by the older title of a woman who had raised the sovereign and who could still, at 72, tell her when she was being foolish. The Sisters of the White Pine were given a new house at Brenvar, larger than the old one, built on the same foundation but with wide windows facing the morning light, so that the dawn came in differently than it had before. The 7 who had died were named in the foundation stone. Yseri was made steward of the High Hand. She kept the dark gray livery and the iron pins in her hair, and she ran the sovereigns day to day, and she did not go back to being invisible, although she remained, by long habit, very quiet. Drevin of Vosk Alder did not return immediately to the north. He stayed 3 months in Corvath, ostensibly to settle the legal questions raised by the dissolution of the Elder Right and the elevation of the High Crown. The legal questions did not, in fact, take 3 months. They took 6 weeks. He stayed the other 6 weeks because he was asked to stay by a young queen who had inherited a kingdom she did not yet know how to govern, and who needed, and admitted, she needed the counsel of a man who had governed his own kingdom for 14 years without disgracing it. He gave the counsel. He gave it well. He did not press her. In the second month, Mareska began to take her tea with him in a small east-facing solar at the 8th hour of the morning, and the tea grew, by slow degrees, into a habit, and the habit grew into the thing it was always going to grow into, although neither of them named it for a long while. The first time he kissed her, it was on the night before he was to ride north to deal with a border issue that had been festering since his absence. They were standing on the long balcony of the solar. The first snow of the year was beginning to fall on the rooftops of Corvath. He had told her, very quietly, that he would be gone 3 weeks at the most, and that he would write, and that she was to send for him at any hour if she needed him for any reason. And she had said something light in response that did not match the way her hand had risen to rest against the iron circlet on his sleeve. He had looked at her. The amber of his eyes had gone the color of a candle flame held to old honey, and the bell thing in her chest, which had been quiet for 2 months, had rung once, low and clean and certain. He had bent his head. He had asked, with no words, the same question he had asked her on the first night in the Champion's Tower times, "May I?" She had answered the same way she had answered him then, by closing the small space between them with her own hand. The kiss had been very careful. Neither of them had been careful about anything afterward. Calden of Halmanreach kept his word. He returned to the Southern Crown, and he wore his black and his red, and he ruled his kingdom with a competence Mireska had not expected, and a quiet that surprised the wolves of his court. The man in his pay who had sent the letter about Brenvar was found, 3 weeks after the binding, in a wine cellar in the southern capital, dead by his own hand or another's. The southern wolves who investigated could not entirely tell, and Calden did not encourage them to look harder. He came to Corvath only twice in the first year. The first time was on the High Crown's invitation to attend the formal sitting of the realm's reconstituted High Council. The second time was on his own initiative, in late spring, with a small retinue and a single sealed scroll, which he placed on the table in front of Mireska in the small east-facing solar where she now took her tea most mornings. "I owe you a thing," he said. She looked at the scroll. She did not open it. "Your Majesty?" "Calden," he said. He smiled. It was a real smile this time, almost gentle, although she noticed she would always notice that his eyes did not quite warm with it. "We are past majesties, you and I. The scroll is the names. Every man my cousin Vela placed in my court that I had not yet flushed out by the time you began drawing them out of her. There are 19. 3 of them are men I had thought were my friends. I have removed them. I thought you would like to know." "Thank you," Mareska said. "I do not say it lightly," Calden said. "I have not had many friends in my life, and 3 of 19 is a high percentage. I came north in part because I wanted to look you in the face when I told you that I am angrier about the 3 than I am about the 16, and that I have not yet decided what kind of king the anger will make me. I hope a better one," Mareska said quietly. "That is what I hope also." He inclined his head. He turned to leave. At the door of the solar he paused. He did not look back. He spoke as he had spoken on the night of the binding, in the antechamber, tired, almost kind. "Drevin is a good man, better than he himself believes, which is the only kind of good man worth anything. I am glad you did not choose me. I would have made a thing of you that you would not have liked, and I would not have known I was doing it until it was too late." He paused. "He asked me, before I came, whether I would forgive him for the years between us. I told him I would think about it. I have been thinking about it on the ride. I will write to him in the autumn." He left. Mireska sat at the small table for a long time afterward, with the unopened scroll between her hands, and she did not cry, but she was glad, not for herself, but for the kingdom of Halmanreach, that the Southern Crown had, after all, been bent rather than broken. She did not open the scroll until the evening. There were, as he had said, 19 names. She wrote each one on a separate sheet, and she sent them out, one by one, in the slow, patient way the High Crown was learning to do its work. The first heir was not born in the 3rd year, as the Old Covenant had required. The Old Covenant had been dissolved. The High Crown had no covenant. The first heir was born in the 4th year, in late summer, in the high east-facing solar where his mother had taken her tea every morning of her reign. He was a boy. He had his father's amber eyes and his mother's wheat-pale hair, and on the 3rd day of his life, when Mother Teresa lifted him out of the cradle to bring him to the window for the morning light, the small, soft skin of his sternum gave out a brief, gentle pulse of slate-colored light and went dark again. Mother Teresa did not say anything. She placed him back in his mother's arms, and she kissed him on the forehead, and she went to make the tea. Drevin, sitting on the edge of the bed in his shirt sleeves with his ironed circlet on the table and his hair full of the morning, looked at his son with the careful, astonished face of a man who had not, until very recently, believed he would be permitted any of this. "He has it," he said quietly. "He has it," Mareska agreed. "What will it mean for him?" "I do not know," Mareska said. "I will not arrange it. He will find out for himself when he is old enough, and the realm will help him learn it, and we will not place him at any hospice or any trial or any board that someone else has built. He will be a child first. He will be a man second. He will be whatever the blood fire is for, third, and not before." Drevin's hand came up and rested against her hair. "My queen," he said. "My king," she answered. The boy in her arms made the small considering sound that all newborn wolves made, the sound that was not yet a word and not yet a howl but was already a question. Outside the long window, the wind moved across the rooftops of Corvath, and the sun came up on the realm of the twin crowns and the high crown above them. And the first new pup of the High Line in a generation slept against his mother's heart, with one small hand wrapped around the worn edge of her old wolfskin, half-cloak the cloak she had worn in the sundering Colosseum 5. Years ago, the cloak she had refused to let the robe mistress take from her, the cloak that still smelled faintly, if you held it close, of the saxifrage of the eastern mountains. The realm did not know yet, that morning, that the heir had been born. It would learn by the evening. It would howl by the night, the long, low note of recognition that it had made on the night of the binding. It would howl again at the boy's naming, and at his first shift, and at the smaller, quieter milestones of a childhood the High Crown would guard, this time, with all the watchfulness that had been denied to her own. And in a small chamber in the deepest house of the Ash Council, an old woman in a deep blue robe who had given 73 names by then, and who had perhaps 60 more left in her herd, through the high, narrow window of her cell, the distant sound of the city beginning to celebrate. And she closed her eyes, and she did not weep either, because she had not wept in 43 years, and she was not going to begin now. But she lowered her gray head onto her folded hands, and she said, very quietly, into the stones of her cell, the only word she had not yet been compelled to speak: "Forgive." The blood fire of the High Crown, 4 miles away across the sleeping city, did not answer her, but it heard her. And in the slow turning of the years that followed, in the long, patient unweaving of every thread the wounded archivist had woven, the High Queen of Corvath, who had once been a foundling, who had once been a champion, who had once been the prize of a tournament that 2 kings had tried to claim and that no king in the end had won, would, at the proper hour, in the proper way, in her own time and not in anyone else's, find the way to answer the word also. That is the end of the story, for now. The realm of the twin crowns endured, the high crown above them held. The boy with the amber eyes grew up. Another child followed, a girl with her grandmother's eyes the color of wet slate, and the line of the High Line did not, after all, die out. The 2 kings who had once stood on the dais of the sundering Colosseum and claimed the same woman became, by slow degrees and in the proper order, first allies, and then friends. Although Calden of Halmanreach never did entirely stop smiling, the smile that was not a smile. And Drevin of Vosk Alder never did entirely stop being the kind of man who kissed his queen on the temple every morning before he opened the day's correspondence. And Mireska, who had walked the long path of the Colosseum 5 years before, with blood drying on her jaw and a pair of borrowed sabers across her back, and who had been told 3 different versions of her own life, in 3 different rooms, in 3 nights, never forgot the bell thing in her chest, the blood fire of her father's line. And she taught her children to listen for it the way Mother Teresa had taught her, long ago, to listen for the silence in a room before stepping into it. Some thrones are won by sword, some are won by birth, some are won by the slow, patient refusal to be the prize that someone else has built a board to claim. Mirska's was won by all 3, and by a 4th thing besides the willingness, in the antechamber of the sundering Colosseum on the night of the 2nd moon, to set down the saber she had earned and pick up, in its place, the harder weight of a crown that had been waiting for her since before she was born. She wore it well. She wore it for a long time. And the wolves of the twin crowns, and of the high crown above them, would tell the story of her of the foundling, the champion, the queen who chose neither king and bound them both for as many generations as wolves would tell stories, which is to say, for as long as the moons rise, and the cold winds come down off the eastern mountains, and the white saxifrage blooms at the end of every long winter on the slopes above the place that had once been a hospice and had become, in its proper time, a house again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.